Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the most awesomest homesteading channel on planet Earth that typically doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with homesteading. Homesteading off the grid. Tonight, I have a special treat for you. I brought you into my living room where you get to see my family's beautiful Christmas tree we just put up a few days ago. And we've got the warmth of the wood stove here beside us. And by popular demand, been getting some comments in the comment section, been getting some emails. I'm going to read you a Bigfoot Sasquatch Christmas story. Yes, I am. Our story tonight comes from Volume 7 of the Bigfoot Sasquatch Files, which is included in Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Anthology 1, FYI. This is Volumes 1 through 10, and FYI number 2, knock on wood here on the coffee table in the living room, I believe I'm going to have volume 16 out before Christmas. We haven't published a Bigfoot Sasquatch Files volume in 3.5 years. I know we had that crazy mix up with a online streaming service who wanted to turn it into a series, but wanted me to give up all creative rights, and they wanted to turn it into an alphabet soup hero saga. It was Hollywood, and I refused to do it. But whatever, we lost some momentum. But we've had a lot of your stories coming in. Some of my own creative juices have been flowing to go into the stories to create Volume 16. Watch for it. We hope to have it out by Christmas. If you have a potential Bigfoot Sasquatch story you'd like for me to share with the world, you can send it to us here at the channel. The channel's email address is crazylake@mail.com. You must give me your permission to share your story if you do send it. Now, before jumping right into the story, I want to mention that tonight's story is being sponsored by my favorite sponsor, Vevor. Yeah, I guess you're supposed to call it Vevor. I always call it Vevor. Whatever. Hey, check out what they sent us this time. Now, I wanted to do an actual demo of this, but we're well into December now, and temperatures in my part of the world here in Central Virginia have been getting down into the 20s every night. And so we've had some of our, where I want to put this, the water's frozen because that line's not wrapped with Vevor heating water line tape, which the ones under the house is. So our house is fine. It's not freezing at all. But I got this. Let me show you this beautiful product. This is the Vevor 100 feet long stainless steel water hose. Now, there are a lot of features to this hose. First of all, let me point out that if this was a traditional 100 feet long rubber hose or synthetic hose, I wouldn't be able to pick it up and it wouldn't pack down this small. It would be about 4 times this heavy, and it would take up four times the space. So this is a much more compact product. I want to point out that it comes with a specifically made squirter madoodle. All right, so you don't have to worry about going out and getting a specific size squirter madoodle. Comes with it, and it hooks up to a standard connection for your external water purposes, where you would typically put up your hose. It does come with a owner's manual, and I did go through this. As you can tell, it was already open. It basically just says screw it to where it hooks up from your water thing on the, of course, it's the other side that hooks up to this. But look at this. Very flexible, very bendable. It's stainless steel. It does not rust. It's rust proof. We have quite a few hoses around the property. We've been needing to replace them because they've been sitting out in the sun. Yes, it's our fault for not putting them away properly after using them, but I'm telling you, in the summers here in Central Virginia, it gets in the mid to upper 90s and stays that way for like 3 months. It's actually more pleasant in the Philippines, which is in the tropics, 7 degrees above the equator, during July, August, and September than it is here in Central Virginia. And so we go out, we water our gardens, and a lot of times we just leave the hoses out. The sun deteriorates them, they've cracked. This Vevor stainless steel water hose is crack proof. It's impenetrable. So there's been times I've run over some of the other hoses with my truck or with a 4-wheeler. Got one with the lawnmower once. Now I got to make sure I don't do that with this. This will nick my blades. But this is a lot tougher, rust proof, and puncture proof. That's the word I'm looking for. And guys, it's affordable, guys and gals. The 100 feet long stainless steel Vevor water hose is available on Amazon for, as of this recording, only like $36.88. You go out and you buy you a 100 foot long, 100 feet long for the grammar Nazis out there. Traditional water hose, you're looking at $100 easy. So they're 3 times as expensive, but they're not nearly as durable. They take up more space. This is a much more valuable product at a much less expensive price. Vevor's mantra is tough tools, half the price. Probably says it on there. It's true. They've been sponsoring this channel for 7 years. Every single product we've ever gotten from them still works as if it were new. So Vevor, thank you so much for sending me that hose. I'm sorry I couldn't hook it up and spray water to show that it works. I know it works. But we've been having sub-freezing temperatures, and that's just not possible at this time. All right, but trust me, there'll be many videos in the future where we actually do some homesteading stuff, like gardening and whatnot. We do a lot of whatnot around here, and I'll make sure to use that hose to give you an update on how well it does work, just like the aerator in the pond. Remember I did the Vevor aerator back in July? I've made a few videos where I show the effects of that. It's cleaned up all the algae, the water is clear, the fish are alive and happy. They just jump up for their food now. God bless them, and not in the southern way. All right, in the real way, God bless those little fishies, every one of them. Now, with that in mind, to kind of misquote Tiny Tim, let's get into it. This is, again, a Christmas seasonal-oriented Bigfoot Sasquatch story. It does have a very special meaning to it, and I'll get to that at the end. But with no further ado, as my beautiful bride dearly, aka Giggly Girl, would say, let's just get right into it. Well, look at this. By the way, you can get these. You can get these in print or Kindle on Amazon.com, or you can go to our Etsy store, and the link for both of those places is in the description box below. And I do have a limited number of copies of these that you can get autographed from our Etsy store, and they're half the price of the Amazon books. And the link for that super awesome Vevor stainless steel hose will be in the description box below as well. Make sure to show Vevor some love, and if you can think of somebody that might enjoy that stainless steel hose for Christmas, go ahead and get it for them while there's still time. And when you do order any of my books from Etsy, you get this totally awesome custom made Get My Six bookmark. It says Crazy Lake and Bigfoot Sasquatch always has my six. I send at least one of these out with every book that's ordered. So let's go ahead and get into the story now. It's called Snow Angels. Some of you may have heard it, some of you might not have, but let's get started. Carolyn was 40 now, and she couldn't figure out why she was so unhappy, especially on this day, the day after Thanksgiving, the day that she and her husband Tom and their 2 beautiful daughters, Ella and Jenna, were putting up and decorating the Christmas tree. Tom was taking the easy way out, as he'd begun to do in recent years. At 42 years old, Tom was feeling tired these days, and he was taking full advantage of his sales skills by sitting on the couch and watching his girls, as he referred to his wife and his daughters, do all the work. I am working, he told them when they'd adamantly admonished him for his lazy ways. I'm supervising. And to prove it, every now and then, between sips of ale, he'd tell one of his daughters, or Carolyn, that the left side of the tree had far more ornaments than the right side, and to make sure to place their next few ornaments on the right side of the tree to even it out. After hanging every third ornament or so, Carolyn would stand back and take it all in. Her girls, Ella 10 years old now and Jenna 8, were so adorable, she thought. They'd both gotten the best genes that she and Tom had to give. They were already dominating all the other kids, including the boys, in any and all sports they played. Carolyn wasn't surprised, and it was due to those aforementioned genes. She and Tom had met while competing together on the track team back in college. And Tom, Carolyn thought, so handsome despite his middle-aged spread. Sure, he still jogged and ate mostly healthy, but the occasional 6-pack, or 12, of beer and 4 slices of pizza at a time, a couple of times a month, or a week, contributed to the stereotypical dad bod so many men his age sported. But through it all, his ever-growing belly and all, Tom had always been faithful. He'd always been supportive. He had always been loving to both Carolyn and his daughters. Carolyn herself had done everything the way she was supposed to do it. She never got in trouble at school, avoiding any negative marks on her proverbial permanent record that people never figure out doesn't really exist until they hit 40. Her grades and athletic achievements had gotten her into college, where she graduated cum laude, just like both of her parents before her. Yet, and like so many middle-aged yuppie types with whom she fully identified, she felt as if having done everything the right way was one big recipe that led up to nothing more than a feeling of emptiness. It's like it had all been one big lie. At times, she actually felt regret for never having been more daring, taken a risk, gotten arrested even, just to see if having strayed down the proverbial wrong road for a while may have added more spice to what she felt was her extremely boring, perfect life. Carolyn thought more of her past as she watched Ella and Jenna struggle over the star for the top of the tree. Tom, just like last year, would have to get up off his rump and help them with this part of the project, putting an end to his supervisorial ways. What was coming to Carolyn's mind now was the 10 years she'd spent teaching before getting pregnant with Ella and making the decision to stop working and stay at home to be the best full-time mommy she could be. Tom was pulling down 6 digits pretty easily at his brokerage firm by then, and they'd never lived above their means, unlike many of their middle-class yuppie-type peers who were so far in debt they'd never get out, so they believed they'd be able to make it off of one income, and for the last 10 years they had. Carolyn knew she had lived the poster image of a life the way it was supposed to be lived. She had everything in life that any non-materialistic / consumeristic yuppie, rare as they are, could want. A beautiful and healthy family, a wonderful home in which to live. Her bills were paid and there was more than plenty of money left over afterward. The only debt she and Tom had was the mortgage, and it was less than half the amount it had started out to be, and Tom's financial prowess had allowed them to accumulate a sizable nest egg. So why did she feel so empty? Her mother, God rest her soul, now gone these past 3 years, had labeled it psychosis immediately after the event, as that night when Carolyn had been 10 years old, her daughter Ella's age, would always be referred to in hushed tones by Carolyn's parents and doctors. The event. A night and an event of which to this day even her husband Tom was unaware. She would certainly never tell her daughters. This was one of those take it to the grave type things. A couple of years after the event, Carolyn's father, an actual psychiatrist, not the armchair kind like her mother, would label Carolyn's condition depression. And in order to keep all things ethical, he would send her to see his best good buddy in the business, and his best good buddy, per the orders of Carolyn's father, of course, would put her on a steady stream of medications. Carolyn never liked the meds. She couldn't stand the side effects. She'd go on and off of them back and forth over and over, but her father always figured it out, and he would make sure to witness her taking the pills, and he would ground her indefinitely until she could be trusted to self-administer. This went on for a number of years until one day, Carolyn discovered running. It came first out of anger. Having been caught not taking her pills again and being 15 and hormonal and refusing to take them despite her mother and father's demands, she'd ran out of the house and, well, she just kept running. Carolyn's parents, having decided Carolyn might not be coming home after having given her what they'd felt was ample time to cool down, had jumped in the car and gone looking for her, and they discovered her 4 miles down the road from their house. She was standing at the side of the road, hands on her hips, though not bent over. She was standing tall, having already caught her breath, and she wore only a slight glisten of sweat on her face. "How did you get here so fast?" her father asked after rolling down the window. "I ran," she said. "Want to ride home?" her father asked, the sound of amazement in his voice. Carolyn took his tone as a compliment of her achievement, and she got in the car and went home with her parents. As it was, it just so happened to be a month into the new school year. Carolyn's father made a deal with Carolyn that day on the way home in the car. He'd read study after study which proved that long-distance running was as effective in treating certain mental illnesses as was many medications. He told Carolyn that if she joined the cross-country team at her high school and if the running seemed to work in her case, then she could quit the meds. Carolyn agreed, and after her father successfully convinced the cross-country coach to allow Carolyn to join the team, even though they'd started the season 2 weeks before, the deal was struck. Carolyn got off the meds, and she would end up being an all-state runner that year as a sophomore, having had no running experience other than the time she'd set out in an angry rage and ran 4 miles nonstop, mind you, in blue jeans and shoes that, though casual and sporty in nature, were not running shoes. Carolyn's senior year in high school, she was state cross-country champion, and she would win the 2-mile state championship as well in track and field and finish second in the mile. A la college scholarship, a la meeting her husband Tom on the track team, and a la everything else ever since. until a year ago, when she'd broken her ankle. Carolyn had been running a 5K fun run with her daughters, pacing them, when she'd come down off the side of a sidewalk the wrong way, shattering her ankle instantly, and then falling to the ground and writhing in pain. Her running days, at least for the foreseeable future, were over. About 3 months after her injury, Carolyn began slipping into what her father, and God rest his soul too, as he died a year before her mother, had referred to as depression way back when. Carolyn knew it. She knew the signs well. However, she could remember the side effects of the meds, and she refused to go see a doctor who she felt would insist she begin taking them again, despite Tom's pleas to get her to make an appointment with someone. "I'm sure they've come a long way with those things," Tom had told her when he and Carolyn had talked about her blues. He could tell she was down, and he knew most of it had to do with the fact that she'd lost a very important part of her lifestyle, part of who she was with the loss of her running, and it was only then that Carolyn had confided in him that, as a child, she'd been diagnosed with depression and that she'd been on meds. It was the first time in their more than 20 years together that Tom, a former All-American steeplechaser back in college, truly knew the reason Carolyn had become a runner in the first place. However, she certainly did not tell him about the night of the event. Oh no, that one, the event, that one was going with her to the grave. Even the girls were now noticing Carolyn's long naps, and though they never voiced their concern, they did have concern over Mommy's drinking. They'd never seen Mommy touch a beer, but a few months after her injury, Mommy started having a beer with Daddy. Now, on more than one occasion, they were finding themselves peeking around the corner of their room and down the hall on nights when Daddy had to carry Mommy to bed because she'd gotten drunk and passed out on the couch again. "Who's going to plug in the lights?" Carolyn asked as she helped herself to one of Tom's beers, the thought of a beer having popped into her mind. Everyone acted as if they hadn't noticed and as if they were not concerned, but they had and they were. "Me," the girls yelled in unison. And just like every year in the past, they held the plug and stuck it into the outlet together. The tree lit up brightly, and just like every year in the past, it was absolutely beautiful. Carolyn and her family would no doubt have yet another wonderful Christmas. Their lives were perfect, absolute bliss, and Carolyn was miserable. Nothing could have made for a more perfect day for putting up the tree than what had happened during the last hour of the day: snow. It was the first snow of the year, and it was coming down now an hour after dark, hard and heavy. It hadn't come as a surprise, as the weather forecast had been calling for it, but Carolyn and Tom had both warned the girls not to get their hopes up too much because the forecast was so often wrong. However, the forecast had been right on the money this time. The couch in the living room was positioned so that when sitting on it, one could either turn their head slightly to the right to see the fireplace, or turn their head slightly to the left and look out the large picture window. It's over there. There was no television in the living room of this house, just like this house. Never had been, never would be, just like this house. And the family of four had sat on the couch in that last hour of daylight, alternating glances between the fire in the fireplace and the snow coming down outside, and of course their beautiful tree, which stood in the middle. The girls had cuddled up between Tom and Carolyn, going on and on about what they wanted for Christmas, now only weeks away. Their parents had teased them about having doubts that they could behave for the final weeks leading into Christmas. This, as every child knew, a requirement to get what they wanted. It had been a long, emotional, and adrenaline-filled day, and it was no surprise to Carolyn that both the girls and Tom dozed off shortly after dark. Carolyn had made her way well past that 3-beer buzz well before dark, and she was now well on her way to oblivion. Sure, it would have been the perfect lead-in for passing out drunk on the couch, but with the snow still visible as it came down outside by moonlight, sleep was the furthest from Carolyn's mind. What filled Carolyn's mind at this time, while the most important people in her life slept beside her, was memories, vivid memories of the event from all those years ago. Carolyn had been 8 years old at the time, the same age of her younger daughter Jenna now. It was the same time of year, potentially to the day. Mommy and Daddy were finishing up getting ready for a holiday party. Not a Christmas party, mind you. Slightly distracted by the Christmas music sounding display there from the dryer, which means the clothes are dry. Not a Christmas party, mind you, because Mommy and Daddy's friends were politically correct long before being politically correct was cool, or even a thing for that matter. And Carolyn had been staring out the window, witnessing the year's first snowfall. "It's snowing," she yelled with the excitement only a child could muster for such weather. "It's snowing." "Uh-huh," her father had said, tying a tie around his neck. Her mother had chosen to ignore her entirely, as her mother would do most of her life. Carolyn paid no never mind. She continued staring out the window, and as she did so, she saw the headlights of a car pull into her drive. She stared down from her second-story bedroom window through the windshield of the car in the driveway, and she saw her babysitter, Lori, leaning over from the passenger seat and kissing her boyfriend, Michael, who had brought her. Carolyn knew that about 15 minutes after her parents had left, Michael would drive back around and stop, and he would come in, and after Lori and Michael thought Carolyn was asleep, they would make all those weird sounds they always made down in the living room on the couch. The very sounds that kept her from being able to fall asleep for the longest of times when Lori came over to babysit. It was as if, Carolyn thought, while lying in bed so many nights listening after children go to sleep, or at least the adults thought, adults reverted back to their language of primitive grunts and groans for communication, rather than sticking with the actual words used in modern language. Except for the words, "Oh God," and "I'm coming." That one really threw Carolyn off the first time she heard it. To her knowledge, Lori and Michael had never left. Mommy and Daddy had given Carolyn kisses and hugs, and Daddy's had been half heartfelt. Mommy's had been felt as cold as the snow blowing outside. But that hadn't been new. And then Mommy and Daddy were off, and within minutes, Michael was pulling back into the driveway. An hour after that, Carolyn was in bed listening to the oohs and the ahs and the occasional "oh gods." And after Lori and Michael had both come back, even though Carolyn had never heard them leave, things got pretty quiet downstairs. But still, Carolyn could not sleep. She was too excited about the snow and the upcoming Christmas that it always brought with it. Deciding not to even try to fight sleep, Carolyn had gotten out of bed and she'd made her way back to the window to watch the snow. However, something was different this time. As she peered out the window down to the snow-covered lawn below, she saw a figure. At first, she thought there was a man standing at the edge of her yard, just on the lawn side of the tree line that represented the beginning of the forest that stretched for miles beyond her family's property. But as she squinted her eyes and looked closer, she realized this was no man. Men don't get that big, except for those guys that Daddy liked to watch put on those pads and helmets and throw footballs around at each other on Sundays. But even those guys looked small in comparison to the figure she now saw out on her lawn. Carolyn watched in awe as the figure moved further away from the tree line and closer to the house. It was standing in the middle of the lawn when all of a sudden it flopped down on its back and it began, of all things, making snow angels. Carolyn laughed and she put her hand over her mouth, realizing how loud she'd been. She had the feeling that Lori and Michael were asleep downstairs, both now having come back from never having left, and she didn't want to wake them. She laughed again more quietly, but somehow the figure on her lawn seemed to have heard her. It stopped its flapping motion and lifted its head. It peered up as if looking right into Carolyn's eyes, like it could somehow see in the dark, and then it waved. Carolyn, with the innocence of a child, waved back, convinced she was looking at a bear or some silly circus animal that had been highly trained and then had escaped, having been a bit too highly trained. Whatever the case and whatever it was, she did not fear it. She watched it play in the snow, and she giggled at its antics, and she acted scared when it formed a snowball in its giant hands or paws, as Carolyn saw it, and threw it in her direction. But even then, she wasn't really scared. And when it waved for her to come down and join it, she had no reservations, and she did. Carolyn had sneaked downstairs, and she had sneaked right by Lori and Michael. They were both sleeping on the couch without their clothes. And Carolyn could never understand why they seemed to get so hot every time they came over. But she did her best to cover her eyes as she made her way past them into the back door, which was actually on the side of the house. She then made her way out onto the lawn to join the silly circus animal that had obviously escaped and had ventured out to play in the snow. She'd slipped her coat and snow boots on just before going out. She'd had them both at the door in hopes it would indeed snow. When Carolyn reached the creature standing in her yard, she stared straight up and into its face. She'd never seen anything so tall. Anything that stood on two legs, of course. The creature was covered with hair and it looked like no circus animal Carolyn had ever seen. But just before she might have gotten scared for real, considering what the creature before her might be, the creature smiled and it giggled, and Carolyn did the same. And in unison, as if reading each other's minds, they fell to their backs and they began making snow angels. Carolyn and her new strange friend played for hours. Sure, it was cold, but when Carolyn would shiver, her new strange friend would pick her up in its arms, hairy arms, and it would warm her. It would give her hugs that were not half heartfelt and certainly not cold. For the first time in her life, Carolyn felt loved. How could this be? Carolyn could remember thinking, even years later and even as an adult, how could I feel so loved and accepted by something not even human that didn't know me any better than I ever knew what in the hell it even was? Carolyn, at one point during a college psychology 101 class, would hear the term empath. And she would instantly think back on the night of the event. But just as the professor said the idea of empathy could not be scientifically proven and therefore was nothing more than a myth, a psychological superstition, she'd written the idea off just as quickly as it had entered her mind. After having felt found for half a second, she once again felt lost. But not on the night of the event. Oh, on that special snowy night, Carolyn had felt loved and accepted for the first time in her life. And she had had so much fun playing with her new friend, and it mattered not to her what sort of animal it might be. It was her new companion. And with her new companion, she made snow angels. She built a snowman. She and her new companion threw snowballs at each other and a few at Michael's car. They were doing all the things that Mommy and Daddy had never made the time to do with her. And after having done these wonderful, wonderful things for some time, and Carolyn having caught cold again, her new companion picked her up in its arms and hugged her for real and warmed her. And then they were hit right in the face with blaring headlights. Mommy and Daddy had just pulled into the drive and they'd seen Carolyn and her friend. "Let my daughter go!" It was Daddy's voice. Without even turning the car off, he jumped out and had begun running into the yard, through the snow, toward Carolyn and her new friend. Carolyn's new friend put her down, kissed her lightly on the head, and as if it had never been there at all, it disappeared into the tree line. Never to be seen again. Daddy had thought of calling the police on the night of the event, but after having gone back to the car to get a flashlight in order to see which way the perpetrator had fled, based upon his or hers or its tracks, and having seen the tracks left behind, Daddy did not call the police. Further, Daddy had instructed Carolyn and Mommy that no one was to ever speak of the event. Ever. And the event was certainly never to be spoken of in the presence of others, because there was no way the good psychiatrist would be labeled crazy. Why, it would cost him his business and his family their livelihood. Daddy, of course, would spend the rest of Carolyn's childhood trying to convince her that she was crazy. She had not, he would tell her when she broached the subject, played in the snow for well more than 2 hours with something that does not exist. She, he would tell her, was so fortunate not to have been kidnapped by some psychotic lunatic child molester who had obviously been out on that dark snowy night seeking his next victim. Carolyn, her father would go on to put the proverbial icing on the cake, had been one lucky little girl. But Carolyn had always known the truth. And never having spoken of it aloud to anyone her entire life had driven her into a very painful lifelong depression. As now 40-year-old Carolyn reminisced about the night of the event when then 8-year-old Carolyn had had the time of her life playing in the snow with something that was not supposed to exist, and of how innocent and wonderful it had been, the complete opposite of having to bury the lie of the event and the creature's existence for the next 32 years of her life, she was brought back to the present time and present events by way of noticing a large dark figure standing just outside the tree line in her yard, where the lawn bordered the forest. Could it be? "I'm seeing things," Carolyn said to herself softly as she rose, ever so carefully, making sure not to wake her family. She then made her way to the large picture window and stared out into the snowy darkness for a better look. "Oh my God," she said. Either her eyes were deceiving her or she was shit-faced drunk, she thought, because she was still seeing what appeared to be standing by the edge of the forest. Carolyn, as quietly and stealthily as she'd gotten off the couch and made her way to the picture window, slipped out the front door of her family's home and into the dark, snowy night. She hadn't put on her coat, and she wore only house shoes on her feet. She was wearing flannel pajama pants and an old Nike hoodie that was ragged and worn because of both factors, more comfortable than anything else she usually wore around the house. It was cold, but she was well into her cups, so she wasn't feeling the effects of the weather, and besides, her focus was not on the temperature, but on the figure she believed she'd seen at the edge of the woods. Just as Carolyn made her way out of the realm of light being cast onto the snow from within her house, out of the picture window, and into the shadows, the figure she believed she'd seen appeared to have ducked into the woods. Carolyn decided to follow. Carolyn made her way 50 yards or so into the woods before the effects of the weather and the temperature really hit her, and in a word, sobered her up. She realized she was cold. She realized she was out in the snow and in the woods at that, and in what she referred to her outfit as her skivvies and wearing only house slippers. She realized that the creature that she thought she'd seen could not have been real. Sure, it might have been real all those years before when she'd seen it as a little girl, but what was she was experiencing now was merely what her parents might have referred to as an episode of psychosis, mostly alcohol and memory induced. Carolyn was convinced she'd finally lost all her marbles and that she was now completely, indefinitely, totally, and undeniably batshit crazy. Carolyn stood, figuratively staring over the precipice of her insanity. At a spot in the forest where there was a wide opening in the canopy above her, the moon was full and its light shone down brightly through the opening in the canopy above her. She looked up through the treetops and to the moon and she said, "F it. What the F it is it all for anyway?" With that, she fell flat on her back. She made several snow angels, and then, and for the last time she hoped, she fell asleep. "Daddy!" It was Ella. She'd woken up to find that Mommy was gone, and she was scared. "What is it?" Tom said, waking and sitting upright, rubbing tired eyes. "Mommy's gone." "There she is," Jenna said. She'd woken up when her sister had woken their father. She hadn't even noticed her mother was gone. She'd simply run to the picture window to see if it was still snowing. Tom and Ella rose from the couch and they made their way to the window. They joined Jenna in staring out the window, and what they saw shocked them all. Jenna had been right. There was Mommy, outside, being carried. Someone or something was carrying Mommy, limp in its arms, from out of the forest. Just as it reached where the light cast through the window met the darkness, it knelt, and it ever so gingerly lay Mommy in the snow. Then it stood, it turned, and it slowly made its way back into the forest. "What in the name of God?" Tom said, just a whisper. "Go get her, Daddy," Ella said, "before the bear comes back." Tom knew that what had carried his wife out of the forest and laying her on the snow-covered lawn was certainly no bear, but he did agree that it would be best for him to retrieve his wife and bring her into the house before it, whatever in God's name it, or he or she, was, returned, and he did. When Tom brought Carolyn into the house, he carried her straight to their bedroom and put her in bed. She slept the rest of the night, the alcohol running through her veins a big help. When she woke up the next morning, fortunately with no hangover, she believed she'd had a very vivid dream brought on, no doubt, by a combination of the time of year, the snow, the booze, but mostly memories of the event from all those years ago. However, Tom and the girls, after allowing Carolyn plenty of time to wake up over coffee, informed her that the events of the night before had not been a dream. They had been real. Very real. Carolyn's family decided they'd keep the events between themselves. However, unlike her parents when she'd been a child, they decided that they could and would speak of the events among themselves as freely and as often as they liked. Carolyn found immediate comfort in being able to talk about things no one else would ever believe with the people who mattered to her most. She found comfort in knowing she was not crazy, and she found comfort in no longer having to live a lie. Carolyn gave up drinking as a New Year's resolution a little more than a month later. By the following spring, her injury had healed to the point that she could begin running lightly again, and by the fall, she was running local 5Ks and 10Ks again. And every Christmas, while families all over the world stare out their windows waiting on a fat man in a red suit who is said to ride around the entire world, giving gifts to all the children of the world, Carolyn and her family stare out their big picture window waiting to catch a glimpse of something else. Something as reclusive, if not more so, than the man that they call Saint Nick. They wait, sometimes patiently, sometimes not, to see if they can capture just a glimpse of potentially Bigfoot Sasquatch. The end. So folks, I hope you enjoyed our Christmas Bigfoot Sasquatch story, Snow Angels. Again, that's from Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 7, which was written as a special Christmas edition. You can get each edition as a standalone edition from Amazon in both print and Kindle, or you can get the first 10 volumes in the anthology, Anthology 1, which is volumes 1 through 10. And forward thinking a little bit, if I do make it to volume 20, again, volume 16, hopefully coming out before Christmas of this year, we'll have an anthology too, perhaps, but who knows? No one can predict the future. I don't know what I'm going to be doing 10 minutes from now. But thanks for being with me. Again, I hope that you are having a wonderful holiday season there, Christmas season with your family. I want to thank my sponsor, Vevor. Remember, there's the link for this stainless steel Vevor water hose in the description box below. Vevor, love you guys. Thanks for hooking me up here at this channel for the last 7 years. What a great 7 years it's been. I'll see the rest of you for more next time for the most amazing homesteading channel on the planet that typically has nothing whatsoever to do with homesteading whatsoever. Homesteading off the grid. Merry freaking Christmas.